Coming up, the Brooklyn Nets close out home court in style, taking down Toronto Raptors, and oh yes, building up the Noah Clowney and Nic Claxton tandem hype in the process. We dive into it all coming up next.
You are Locked On Nets, your daily Brooklyn Nets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, my friends, it is the Locked On Nets podcast right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. It's your team, the Brooklyn Nets, every single day. I am Adam Armbrecht, and we thank you for making us your first listen of the day. We are 100% free on all those great platforms. And let you know today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets, guaranteed. That's $150, win or lose. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. And welcoming back a hero's journey, Doug Norrie, to the podcast. He crawled so the Brooklyn Nets could run. My goodness, my friend. Nets win, close out home court.
Buddy, we had a stomach thing going for about 2 days, and I was curious about what was going to feel worse, the beginning of this game where it looked like they were going to lose to the Raptors who had no players, or what I went through over a 24-hour period. Turns out, Nets win. Much better. Closing out.
Nothing cures the ills of the body like a Brooklyn Nets victory, 106-102 over the Raptors here, as they will finish out the season on the road, but a nice way to cap things off on Fan Appreciation Night at Barclays Center.
Yeah, final game at Barclays for the season. Mikal Bridges gets up in front of the crowd before the game and actually, effectively apologizes. It was good. I was honest, at least.
No, I know. And this is fun. There's a lot of Noah Clowney stuff we want to get to here. But all these pregame things that they force players to do are absolutely absurd. Nobody wants to do it. And yes, Mikal Bridges does apologize, but it's almost like, hey, that was a bummer, huh? Well, we'll be back, though. Don't you worry about that. And then walks off the court. It's the classic.
Yeah, it's an impossible spot to be in. I know that why they want to do it. It's paying lip service to the fans, which they deserve. You go to the games, you want to see that the players care, which they do. But him having to get up there and basically give a thank you for a season, which was, by all metrics, a major disappointment, was pretty funny. But final game in Barclays against an undermanned Raptors team. You're hoping that they pull out the win. You're hoping for a sign of life. It took a while for them to get there, but I think we came out with some, major league positives from this game, starting with the pairing of Clowney and Claxton, who, had an absolute block party in this one and raises probably some interesting questions going forward into the offseason about sort of how the roster is going to be made up, but no denying that pair tonight combined for 12 blocks and was a really exciting sort of like a defensive tandem to watch.
Yeah, it just gives you that length, right? It gives you the size. It gives you defensive versatility in a way that the Nets haven't had. Day'Ron Sharpe is not that kind of player, right? Even some of the veterans, Dorian Finney-Smith and otherwise, they just don't offer the type of athleticism that Noah Clowney is clearly showcasing on the defensive end. And those two guys working off of one another, it's electric to watch, because every time we've talked about this so much. Well, if Claxton is away from the basket, then you lose the rim protection, or vice versa with any player you want to name on the roster. Now, all of a sudden, you've got two players. He's had 12 blocks, 7 for Noah Clowney. It just felt like they had 7 or 8 arms every time you turned around. And it is the Raptors, and they're a little bit undersized. But these types of games, when that ball gets rolling downhill, it's like you can feel them coming. Even in the closing sequences, when Noah Clowney gives up the ball on a turnover off of former Brooklyn Net Garrett Temple, only to go ahead and block him at the rim as he tries to close the gap on this game. It was so much fun to watch. And to your point, we'll talk about this a lot in the offseason. That combination, it at least changes, I think, or should be changing the idea about the way you think about what they want to do with Nic Claxton, where the market's going to be for him. But this is the kind of player in Noah Clowney that starts to get Claxton going back in the right direction of the elite level of talent it can be if you have someone like this on the court with him.
Yeah, the Clowney stuff, there's a reason we've talked about it multiple episodes in a row now, is because it's been, in what's effectively a lost season, the last little piece of sort of hope at the end of the season to say, okay, well, there's a young guy. He's super young. He was a first round pick. It was unclear. And some of this is going to sound like we're repeating it, but let's say unclear sort of what his role was going to be in the NBA. Was he going to be overmatched? How raw were the tools, they were very raw. but the how far he's come along in like, the span of 1 year, I mean, is really one of the biggest, like, just sort of leaps. And there was a quote, and I you know what, I can't remember who actually said it, but I saw Lucas Kaplan was the one who sort of extrapolated on it. Was that
Claxton, I think, gives the quote.
Oh, maybe it's okay, right. It's Claxton gives the quote that says, just how much, basically intimating how smart Noah Clowney is, right? How much he picks up, and how much he's just like sort of able to retain. And then Lucas ends up going a little bit further on it, basically saying he's heard essentially the same, or that's been what's talked about basically from every single person in the Nets organization, is talking
Right.
about, the sort of just the basketball and just real life intelligence from Noah Clowney and how much he's able to sort of just ingest and then go synthesize and put to use out on the court. And you're just seeing it every single game. Like every single game, it just looks better and better and better. Tonight, like the blocks were there. He's also, there was a few times pump dribble fakes, like and dribble lane. I mean, these are like, he's a stretch 4 or 5 that's starting to do some things that you kind of just don't see guys do off the bounce. And if growth isn't always linear, right? And it's sort of sometimes hard to figure out like where it's gonna, where it's peaking and where it's like sort of gonna stop. But what we've seen from him in just a very short period of time is nothing short of, I mean, exciting would be the word in a season that Nets desperately needed something like this.
And there's two things I want to touch on quickly. One, it's probably like exactly the right amount of exposure to give him. I mean, we would like to see him sooner, want him to do developing longer, maybe, but he needed to come along at the G League to a certain extent, right? And build these qualities up that we're happy to see. But now it's like you'll get this nice electric taste right at the end of the year, and then he gets to go and he gets to work and develop, right? We don't know. We talk about peaks and valleys. It would have been interesting to see the ups and downs for him had he played 30, 40 games. We saw it kind of with Jalen Wilson, right? Different player, different expectations, but we saw the way that kind of comes and goes there. But in this game, there was a moment on the offensive end as well where Nicholas Claxton has the ball at the top of the key. He turns and faces up, takes a couple dribbles, and it's Noah Clowney working the baseline that gets the bounce pass handoff and attacks for an up and under at the basket. That's that kind of thing that even from Nicholas Claxton just never seemed like that was the intention. And I just wonder about the way that it forces different matchups. It's just the Toronto Raptors tonight, but that's something that you want to see continue to grow here. And certainly Noah Clowney what'll end up being 6-7 games, of real solid minute basketball here is going to make it a very exciting and interesting offseason for the Nets. Coming up,
and real quick before we get to this next thing, I just want to, because we'll close out Noah Clowney and talk about more of the rest of the game. But the Nets PR had their own little party tonight with some of the stats they released, but there's a couple of pretty good nuggets in here. Noah Clowney's the 12th teenager in NBA history to block 7 or more shots in a game. Of those 12 teenagers, Clowney is the lowest drafted player to accomplish that feat. Overall, that was 1 most blocks in a game for a rookie in franchise history. Noah Clowney's 7, only 2 guys above him, Sean Williams and Mike Jaminski. The Nets 14 blocks tonight are the most in a game in Barclays Center history since 2012, 2013. And I thought there was one more. Yeah, Noah Clowney's recorded a career high 6 blocks tonight. And there was only 3 other teenagers with 6 more blocks in a game the year. There was Wembanyama, Derek Lively, and 2, and Noah Clowney. So yeah, anyway, Nets PR did absolute work on the those are all via Nets PR, by the way. Did absolute work. And we'll get into Nic Claxton here in a second.
No, of course.
Before that, are you the kind of driver that likes to push things a little further? Ever wonder what adventure could be around the next corner? Our friends at Nissan have a lineup of SUVs with the capabilities to take your adventure to the next level. You got the 2024 Nissan Rogue. It's perfect for the city drives, great escapes. It's got the class exclusive Google built in. It's always updating assistant to call on for almost anything. Forget about connecting your phone anymore. Google Assistant, Google Maps, Google Play Store are all built right into the 2.3-inch HD touchscreen infotainment system. You also got the 2024 Nissan Pathfinder. It's got room up to 8, expansive cargo capacity, advanced available 4x4 capability, 284 horsepower, up to 6,000 pounds of towing. That's what adventure calls. The Pathfinder is there to answer. You got the Nissan Rogue, you got the Nissan Pathfinder. Throw in the Nissan Armada as well and go find your next big adventure. Shop NissanUSA.com.
All right, so as we continue to wrap up the post-game episode, Brooklyn Nets, they close out at home here. 106-102 is the final. We'll talk about the importance, obviously, of Dennis Schroder in all of this. Like, hey, you need a veteran presence, and he has been that guy since coming over in the trade. Another little reminder here, too. I saw this coming into the game. With that win, the Nets went 20-21 at home at Barclays Center this season, which, usually bad teams are just bad across the board, but the Nets were almost, they're right there, almost 500 at home. Now they're a disaster, just 12 wins on the road, and that could get worse here before the season is over. But I thought, you started to talk about this a couple episodes ago when you were healthy and alive. The idea of the fan base giving them something to be excited about and fans being willing to be excited for things. I mentioned it was fan appreciation night. Like, hey, if you're going to close out a bad season, a disappointing season, having all these young players, electric, record-setting franchise blocks, and also it means that 50% of the time when you showed up at Barclays Center, the Nets gave you a win. And then, like, I know that is like pulling at the thinnest of silver lining threads here, but that's nice. And it's nice to cap off the season like that. To hear the way it was, at least watching the broadcast, it seemed like Barclays was as into this meaningless game between two eliminated teams at the back end of the season as they were all year, because they're desperate for something to be excited about. And Clowney, Claxton, Schroder, and all these guys really gave them something to be happy for. So I know I'm going full homer.
It's very simple, man. Fan bases want to. I turn the show off if you heard us say this a million times, but it's just going to ring true all the time. Fan bases are excited when the expectations, when the performance outpaces the expectations, right? The expectations have dropped to nothing, like for the Nets this year. So when they play hard and win, people get excited. And then you'll find things to get excited about. This equation is not difficult. And when you see that the players are like playing hard and want to win, that trickles down or trickles up to the rafters, whichever metaphor you want to take here. Like it translates. And yeah, you can't do that forever. Like, you can't be the plucky team forever. Like, at some point you have to turn a corner for sure. The Nets did that.
Can't live on vibes until infinity.
But yeah, no, of course. But Nets fans, the expectation level has changed. So when you see them play hard and beat the Pistons who have no one, or the Raptors who have no one, you see Claxton put a guy into the basket, like to kind of like seal off the game. Like, yeah, you're going to get excited.
That's when Batman tells you that he's Bruce Wayne. And that's the move right there. He says, that's right. Not only am I the hero you want to look up into the sky and see coming down for you, I'm also a bit of a billionaire tycoon. And by the way, as we look inside of this game too, 5-man starting lineup, everybody gets into double digits. Clowney did finish 7-7. I'm going to say 7-7 and 10, being the blocks and the rebounds to go along with his 10-point performance. We may or may not get to Mikal Bridges here ultimately. Good game from Claxton, obviously 14 and 11, so double-double for him to go along with his 5 blocks. And then 4 assists. Like, again, there's these kind of little breadcrumb trails are really important if you can start to see Claxton seeing the court a little bit better, finding some open shooters as well. But this came down to 2 other players in this starting lineup. Cam Thomas, not a perfect overall shooting night, but 50% from deep. That never hurts, 23 points. And then it's the veteran Dennis Schroder, man, 7 of 18, just 2 of 8 from deep. So flip the script from Cam Thomas, but he gives you 7 rebounds, 9 assists, clutch buckets down the stretch. Like, he is the exact veteran player in the backcourt that the Nets need for these kind of moments. It is not hyperbole to say that if you take away Dennis Schroder in these last handful of games, they've been getting wins, they're probably taking losses, because there are not a lot of guys that seem to have a calm to their game, an understanding of what's coming, and the ability to be the guy you look for on the inbound passes. So when he gets fouled, he goes to the line and knocks down multiple free throws, right? Wants to go after the clutch bucket. Frankly, was absolutely mauled underneath the basket there on one of the final possessions and wanted that too. Probably could have come close to getting a tee, but hey, the rest were letting him go. So I just big tip of the cap, man. He has been as much advertised and beyond coming over in that trade. And I think you have to be kind of like low-key excited that he's under contract going into next year as well.
Yeah, look, they were missing a point guard presence for a lot of the season. Like the Dinwiddie, whether it was by, design or just, attitude, it's like a little hard to tell. But Dinwiddie just kind of stopped being that guy this year. Probably because, as they had said, that they had plans around Ben Simmons being that guy. And then when that didn't really happen, it was like they kind of had no plan B about what the point guard position was going to look like. And we saw Dinwiddie get away from a lot of the stuff they actually Schroeder kind of runs now, right? Like running pick and roll, trying to take guys off the dribble, stuff that Dinwiddie, we were always just kind of confused about why it stopped happening sort of like all together, right? These like ISOs thing. And yeah, teams just need like a calming presence. They need a ball handler. They need a guy who can sort of organize things. I wouldn't say Schroeder's perfect at it, but he's like easily the best on the whole roster by a total landslide. And so to the point where like you can actually see it when he's out of the game, right? That they just really sort of miss it in terms of like how they're going to get their offense structured, or even what they're going to be kind of running on a play-by-play basis. And which I think also endears him to the fans. I mean, he definitely has a chip on his shoulder when he plays. Like, he plays, it looks like he wants to fight at least one player a game from the other team. Just, the Pacers, I think he wanted to fight every single guy. And then the Raptors tonight, I think it was only one or two. Like, he's still diving on the ground at the end of the game to get the ball, right, to tie it up before he doesn't get tied up. He calls a timeout to kind of secure the possession late in the game.
Yeah, 2 times he did that. Yeah.
Right. And so just doing the things, again, like things that will endear you to a fan base are the things that Kevin Ollie said were going to happen and never kind of did, which was, like going after loose balls, doing all these like sort of gritty things. Not a ton of the other guys all the time seem all that interested in doing that stuff, but you can't say Schroder doesn't. He definitely plays with a little bit of just, like, I don't know, like I said, a chip on his shoulder, whatever, a little fire, whatever the term is you want to use. He definitely has it on a team that really doesn't have it anywhere else. Like, no one has it. This is like a totally just run lukewarm kind of squad across the board. And him
dangerously close to a simmer and then back it down a notch.
Yeah, like, and him and Claxton are the two guys that have it, but even Claxton's doesn't always seem like team. I hate that. That's not a dig on him, but it doesn't always seem team oriented. It kind of just seems like, I did something amazing, time to let you know about it. Schroeder seems a little bit more like, I'm doing this for everybody.
Dennis Schroder is Mr. EGB, right? What is it? Energy generating.
Never remember that. Yeah, I can never remember that. Yeah.
We got it though, because there's going to be T-shirts, there's going to be banners, it's going to be all over the arena next season. Just wait to see it. But to your point though, Schroder, his energy and his mentality, it does seem to be geared about, and because he's a point guard too, right? So it makes sense that it's geared towards the team and towards everyone pulling in the same direction and it being productive. Whereas Nicholas Claxton seems to self-motivate around those moments, but they lack those personalities. Really important to have a couple of those guys. So it's a massive game for him. It's only Cam Thomas that leads the team by 2 more points than Schroder, but again, very balanced game from him overall. And just, I'll say quickly here, because there's some stuff I want to get to in terms of what, if you agree with some previous sentiments that I provided around these young players. Mikal Bridges, we can talk about him in a second if you want to here. He did apologize before the game, and I just don't know where to go with him right now. And there's some interesting stuff. Let's hit the break here first. And on the other side, it's not just where he stands in the pecking order, but it's also where he stands in terms of, I think, the leadership hierarchy for what we see on the court. We'll have that discussion coming up next.
All right, before we get to that, tell you about our friends over at FanDuel's playoff time in the NBA and NHL. Plus, you got baseball in full swing. FanDuel is your place to bet every game. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $150 win or lose. You bet on everything from slap shots to home runs to slam dunks, all on an app that's safe, secure, and super easy to use. What are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Make your first bet an automatic win. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
All right, so as we tie a pretty little bow on the Nets post game, beating the Toronto Raptors at home, getting one more victory on the docket as we wind down the season. I'm not here to trend negative about this. I feel like, though, we'd be disingenuous if we didn't mention some other things going on here. By the way, Doug was away for the last one, where we had titled a previous episode. I'm going to say this for the second time on the show, because this is one time when I feel like sometimes Doug wants to call out some people for bad opinions. I'll give one here. We said Noah Clowney has arrived. And then he had his second game as a starter. It didn't look as good, and we got some blowback for our titling. Go watch the game against the Toronto Raptors, then go reread that title for yourself. I feel like we're right on course when it comes to how Noah Clowney is performing. Mikal Bridges only plays 23 minutes in this game. That's fine. He doesn't need to be playing all night, right? He has the record, the longevity, all those things. He's 3 of 9, 3 of 8 from deep. But when we talk about what brought this team back, it's obviously the tandem of Claxton and Clowney in this particular game. It's the leadership of Dennis Schroder. It's the buckets and the shooting from Cam Thomas. As we work our way towards the offseason, I do just keep coming back to, where does Mikal Bridges fit into this hierarchy? It's going to be very shifting and evolving, and maybe he ends up slotting in right where he should be, as the 4th best option on the offensive end and the 3rd best on the defensive end. But it is just weird. It's been a very weird season for Mikal Bridges. And as they leave to go on the road to close things out, I just find that part of this incredibly fascinating. And part of his pregame, quote, speech did seem to offer just the exhaustion, I think, on his end of grinding through this particular year.
I mean, I think they've kind of already set it up, right? Like they've talked multiple times around like bringing superstars in, that players want to play with Mikal Bridges. Like they've been actually, I think, careful with the wording here to be like, Mikal Bridges isn't going to be the best player on the team. Now they've never said that,
100%.
but the way they've phrased it, they've put the information into the negative. You know what I mean? Like it's like, okay,
Right.
by the absence of saying one thing, you've kind of said the other thing. And I think it's like it's very clear, I think, through all of their sort of like, whether it's through the media or whether it's things they've directly said, no one is saying that he's going to be the best player. I think they've actually gone out of their way to say he's not going to be, basically, that they're going to bring in
Right.
these other players, that these superstars want to play with him. And I think that's kind of it. And I don't know if it's I mean, it's clearly a recognition that like his skill level is not of superstar quality. That one is that science is solved. Like that, we've seen that this year. He's just not that guy. It's fine, I guess, but he's had such a dip in expectation here that no one even expects at them. But I think that the franchise has kind of seen it too, and that's why they've said, we're going to pair other guys in here, and he can basically. They never said this, but they might as well have. Like he can go back to like sort of the role he had in Phoenix, which was third, fourth guy. And I mean, take it for what it's worth. He's on that kind of contract right now, so it's probably fine. It'll maybe become problematic later on when you think about the extension and what that's going to look like. But so I think from a leadership standpoint, I'm not like surprised. You can't make guys who they're not,
Yeah.
and I it's hard to fault him for that. And he's just maybe not that guy. The problem is that Nets fans and maybe even the front office, I think, thought he was going to be that guy after last year, and it just really hasn't worked out. And it feels like they've gone sort of overboard this season to start preparing everyone that he's not that guy, right? Like
Yeah.
and it's
Yeah. It's like that.
unfortunate, but it's just kind of the reality at this point.
Yeah, it's that weird thing of overhyped him coming in the trade for Kevin Durant as being, hey, this is what we push for. We had to have him. It's not even about the picks really. And then over the course of it, you go, well, those picks are going to be pretty good though. And also Mikal might not be that guy. And then of course in the shadows here, we'll talk in the offseason, right? Cam Johnson obviously is the other part of that twin banana. But another thing to note here, I looked at this the other day as well when it comes to Mikal, just something to keep in mind for whatever it's worth. He is a 20-point scorer right now on the season. 11 points tonight. I think he'll narrowly still hold on to that. Over the last 3 games, though, if he dips below that, he's only been a 20-plus point scorer once over the 27-game stretch last season with the Brooklyn Nets. At the start of last year with Phoenix, where he was averaging 36 minutes. Now, the role was different, right? 5 more shots per game when he came over to Brooklyn. He was a 17-point-a-game guy. This year, he's taken a couple less shots per game. He's hovering right there at 20. But that's like just another part of this, right? We said coming out of last year, could he be a 20-something point scorer? We said, yeah, that you need him to be 23, 24 points a night. Well, now you're talking about 20 points a night. And I think what the most fascinating thing is at a high level, as you slot him back into his role, as you maybe see him get more into, go look at even the box score tonight. We said this over the last month or so when you looked at his shot charts. In tonight's game, he took 9 shots from the field and 8 of them were from beyond the arc. So as he starts to slot back into being maybe a pure 3-and-D kind of guy, the scoring volume might still live there for him. And he's just going to do it, in the very specific facet, and then hopefully try to lock in on the third best offensive weapon and maybe be a clamp player on defense. So it's just a fascinating arc. And as we close down on Brooklyn for the year, it feels like we're closing down on what was probably a frustrating chapter for Mikal Bridges and the organization, just in terms of how this whole season unfolded. Now he's going to come back in here.
I'm trying to find this. I was putting myself on mute for a second. Sorry about that. As I was trying to find something, because I had done this earlier in the year not early in the year, recently. Oh, here we go. Where I had looked at like the rolling 5-game average of Bridges shots over the course of the season, right? And like sort of like where it had gone in terms of 2-pointers to 3-pointers, like what percentage of his shots were 3-pointers. And without showing it on the screen right now, because I can, or if you're on the podcast, the graph just goes steadily up with where the 3-pointers just become more and more part of his shot profile, which is like just trending toward like a 3-and-D guy again, right? Like whether it's again by design or by just like luck or other guys coming in, but this sort of like recognition that the other things weren't happening. Like he wasn't getting to the mid range as much. He's had a really hard time finishing at the rim this year. We've all seen, it seems like he's blown an inordinate amount of layups this year, which I actually do think, I actually said this before, but I wonder if there's like, he stands to see some positive regression on that. Like you can run bad, I think, over the course of a season on like
the
a
yips around the
kind of
bucket
shot. Yeah. And I actually wonder if like that's something that might be one of these things that like easily fixes itself, and he is just kind of better in that category, because it feels crazy to think that he would miss like so many layups like he did this year. But regardless, he stopped taking a lot of other shots that weren't 2-pointers, or excuse me, that weren't 3-pointers. And I think, by the end of it, he was up to like 65% of his shots were 3-pointers. And that's just a 3-and-D guy at that point. Like that's a guy who's mostly just taking threes, and that's it. So I don't know if we're going to see that scoring come back totally. I like if they get other scorers in here or other guys, like, do you see him taking more shots? Like, I don't think so next year, especially if it's Schroder and Cam Thomas still on the team.
You know what's interesting too, and this is probably we'll get into this more in the off season, but I was just looking it over right now. If you go back and you look over since 2018-19 when he came in the league, he was taking 7 shots a game, almost 4 were from beyond the arc, taking 6.5, under 3 from beyond the arc. He actually always trended like under 40-ish% in terms of the volume, from the field versus from deep. In that last year before the trade, he averaged over 13.5 shots per game. Only 4.7 were from deep. So the productivity was happening actually everywhere else. Then he comes over and it starts to trend back the other way a little bit. You see an uptick on both ends of the floor this year, and this trend that we've seen as the year has progressed. This might actually be, I wonder, maybe we're seeing the breadcrumbs of what they're shifting him into. Like, because if you look over his total career, it's actually not even that, there was a time when he was a very much 3-and-D molded player. He actually was pretty balanced from the field in terms of his shot selection. It came from other places more than beyond the arc. They may see the writing on the wall of what he should be and where he can be the best suited. And let's get there now. Let's start the process now to you being this mold of player that 65% of your shots are going to be perimeter looks, especially as you mentioned at the end there, Schroder, Thomas being on this, right? What is it going to look like with other players they maybe bring in? Like, let's get you in the right spot now, because this 82-game season may be the sample that let us know, it's not going to be the complete package for you over the next couple of years.
Yeah, and I think he saw it too. I think you could see it at times for him on the court where he'd try to beat a guy off the dribble and it just wasn't happening. Like if he had a big wing guarding him this year, it was just kind of a wake-up call,
right?
It was just over. Like he couldn't beat anybody off the dribble, and he couldn't even get into the mid-range a lot of times, because if he was playing anyone with like any strength or any length at all, they just kind of had him locked up. Like the handle's not that great. And I don't know if he caught people by surprise last year, or if it's like, late season and the Nets are playing hard late season and some other teams. Yeah, like matchups, some of the teams aren't. And he was really good. So I don't really want to like totally just give it an asterisk. Like he was really good, but just a lot of that stuff just didn't work for him this year. Either the book was out or he just kind of, got into his own head or whatever. But I mean, go back and look, like how many times he would start a drive and just kind of bail. Just be like, I turn back around, because he just knew it wasn't there for him. I think we saw more as the season progressed. And then eventually we just saw it stop happening altogether for the most part. Like he wouldn't even try anymore. So I don't know if it's like a part mental there, part schematic. But it's very clear that it was happening. And I don't know, maybe you add a better point guard and a more dynamic, scorer on the floor, and he sees a little, softer defensive matchups. Maybe it gets easier. But I think like this late season, this is kind of like who he's become.
Part of as we close out here, part of the thing we're going to talk about the offseason is that inspiring the Nets and what they're going to do this offseason, trying to maximize, not that he is a 1A or a B player, number 2 player for you, but just maximizing the value of everybody, maximizing Cam Johnson. These guys are on the team, so you need to maybe bring in someone to make their jobs easier, make their value that much higher. But I said this last episode as well, as we wrap up the season and head towards the play-in and the postseason, we'll do episodes talking about the other teams in the play-in tournament, guys that are being talked about, whether it's Trae Young, whether it's going to be talking about a player getting out of the play-in, like Donovan Mitchell, highlighting those guys, what the offseason could look like for them, tracking things that work, players that might make sense, low-key free agent buys. So we're going to roll through all those things, plus our grades finally for all these players. If we like them, hated them, who's going out the door, all that good stuff. So we have a nice schedule, Doug, I like to say, as we work our way towards the, quote, Nets offseason.
Yeah, tons of stuff to talk about. Okay. As always, make sure you... Yeah, sorry,
Doug,
man.
Never mind. It's going to be a lot of fun, and Doug's going to be really excited about it. We're just happy that he's back on.
Sure,
the
buddy.
show.
You did all the hyping we needed. What was I going to do? Extra hype? You did all the hype. Like
You're right. You're right.
You did all the hype. I'm not going to do I'm not going to come and take your hype. Take the hype award from you. You did it all, and I was agreeing with you. And now I'm going to close this out. Is it permission? Permission to close out the show, Your Honor? Okay, great. Make sure you go visit WeGotNets.com. Make sure you subscribe to Locked On Nets on YouTube as well. Just like and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts.
You got brains on your head. You've got feet in your shoes. You can steer yourself in any direction you choose. You're on your own, and you know what you know, and you are the guy who'll decide where you go. Dr. Seuss.
One of the all-time great poets. We're back again tomorrow talking more Brooklyn Nets basketball.